Hi, welcome to Whiteboarding 113, Empowerment. In this session, I'm going to take a look at some tools that we can use to empower students. One thing I know for certain is one teacher in a classroom, sometimes two, but either way, there aren't enough teachers to give kids one-on-one support. So the more we can do to empower students, to turn them into little teachers themselves, to help with our classroom, the better. And students really will rise to the occasion. They want to be empowered, they want to feel important, and they want a role. And there's a lot of students in your class that are ready for that role. As teachers, it's our job to empower students and turn them into leaders. And there's a few ways that whiteboarding can help make this happen. First, I've been talking about whiteboarding mistakes, and I'd like to add another one that I call knowledge boarding. So far we've talked about two different whiteboard mistakes. The first one was mechanical boarding, where we go through the motions of boarding rather than using that really effective whiteboarding cycle. The second one was dust boarding, where we think of whiteboards as just an activity. And the third one, knowledge boarding, is done a lot in classrooms. And this is done more by people that are just starting boarding and they don't necessarily understand the power of it. And I think that there's also a huge issue in schools nowadays when it comes to knowledge building. I think that knowledge building has really gotten a bad rap in the past decade since I started teaching. And it's gotten a bad rap on both sides. On one side, there's the group that says knowledge building is a waste of time. How dare we push knowledge into our kids' heads because we should be doing critical thinking. Now, my response to that one, this is shared by a lot of researchers, is that you cannot do critical thinking unless you have some knowledge inside your head to critically think about. When we rehearse knowledge over and over again so that the knowledge becomes a habit, it becomes built into our head so it's just there to call upon, then when we're trying to critically think about things, we have something to think about. And that really does strike at the heart of knowledge boards, because the deal is, if you are giving kids no knowledge at all, they have nothing to think about, and that's not good. They have to have some rehearsed knowledge. But if you're only teaching knowledge, then all you can whiteboard is knowledge. And so there's no critical thinking going on. And that actually is one of the reasons that teachers will simply do knowledge boarding, only asking for pieces of knowledge on a whiteboard, is because they don't view learning as critical thinking connected to knowledge. And that is really the true power of understanding this conundrum about knowledge in a classroom, is critical thinking connected to well-rehearsed knowledge. As a teacher, that's our responsibility. Not too much knowledge, just enough knowledge, kind of right in the middle, that Goldilocks principle, right in the middle, just enough knowledge to critically think about. And the great thing about rehearsing knowledge is that it helps with long-term retention. All right, so let's talk about knowledge boarding real quick. And I want to take a second to just revisit the 3 higher philosophy and technique. It's all about high visibility, high frequency, high information, immediate feedback, and revision. And teachers that only knowledge board, only ask students to produce pieces of knowledge on their board, are violating that principle of high information. There is no reason to ask a student to put pieces of knowledge on the board disconnected from some sort of critical thinking. Whiteboards are a place for students to write their own thoughts, for them to use that knowledge in a critical thinking piece. Gaining knowledge is about repetition, and the fastest way to get repetition is oral recitation. Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that's actually what whole brain teaching is great at, helping students learn knowledge. Using the whole brain, or having students move to something, say something, hear something, right? With a partner, teaching back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. If you do that, you can have students rehearse their knowledge over and over and over and over again. And the amount of time it takes for students to rehearse that knowledge to get it really up inside their head, they could have written it on a whiteboard twice. So why would you have your whole class write down a piece of knowledge twice on their whiteboard when instead they could be doing some teach okay with whole brain teaching where they're reciting that knowledge over and 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 over. When it comes to whiteboarding, they have to have that knowledge stuck inside their head in order to use it. And if you're trying to get students to rehearse knowledge over and over again, you're not going to want them to whiteboard that knowledge. Now, that being said, could you have students write a piece of knowledge up top first as one slow rehearsal and then underneath have them think about that knowledge and do some critical thinking? Sure. I actually think that that's okay as long as the knowledge is a piece of a whole puzzle of thinking on that whiteboard. I don't necessarily think that it's a time saver. Instead, you could do it this way. Okay, choral chant our definition. and we're going to choral chant it 5 times. That's about how long it would take to write down the definition. That's a much more efficient way of getting more reps of knowledge practice and then connecting the critical thinking to it. So knowledge boarding is all about the element in interaction. And a lot of the times the element will be a memory. Okay, think about the thing that you copy down in your notes. That's your memory. The interaction, what is the definition of? Write down this, right? Write down this piece of knowledge that we got. So my example here is, okay, we wrote Pythagorean theorem in our notes. We chanted it once. You guys should know it. Okay, write down the definition of Pythagorean theorem. That's a recipe for failure, right? And it's a one recitation. And here's what we've taught students to do with that, because you know what they're going to do, and we think this is a good thing. They're going to go to their notebook, look at the definition of Pythagorean theorem, and copy it down. They're not actually practicing that knowledge, in my oh so humble opinion. They are practicing finding something and copying it down. You are actually training them to not know it, because their brain goes, oh, I don't have to know this because it's stored here. We store our knowledge in a notebook, and then we copy it over onto the whiteboard. Our brain subconsciously realizes, oh, I don't have to know this. And so this thing that I used to do where write this all down, oh, now here's a great skill, go look it up, write it down on your whiteboard, right? I thought I was teaching students a great skill of seek and find information, which is a great skill. You can practice that skill, but realize if you do that all the time to build knowledge, you're actually subconsciously teaching students that they don't have to know the knowledge because it's stored here. Rehearsing knowledge over and over and over again through oral recitation, and then using that knowledge on whiteboards is very effective. Students copying knowledge down, like one written iteration, and then having to look that definition up and write it down every time, that does not lead to a recipe of success for knowledge. It just doesn't. Definitely a way, in my opinion, not to use whiteboards. Knowledge boarding. Asking students for simple pieces of knowledge, having them write it on their whiteboard. Instead, have them orally recitate the knowledge back and forth, use the whiteboard to get them to think about that knowledge. Whiteboarding is a space for critical thinking. All right, so I just want to remind you of how far we've gotten in our whiteboarding. Looked at our rookie toolkit. We've learned all of those wonderful tools. We are now on the professional toolkit, and today we're looking at some empowerment tools. So student shoutouts, student leaderboards, and on-the-spot tutors. Very powerful methods, but these are professional methods. They are hard to get going in a classroom if you haven't mastered the basics of the whiteboard cycle and whiteboard management and all those tools that are essential to keep whiteboarding going. So I wouldn't start the year with whiteboard empowerment and these tools. I would start the year getting students used to the idea of teacher-led, and then transitioning throughout the year to empowering students to lead. These first student leaderboards, and I've mentioned these in a past episode. Student leaderboards are simply any time there is a leader in a group where they are going to share their thoughts with the rest of the group. The intent of the student leaderboard is to create a temporary teacher. There's one student per group that stands up, shares their board, and shares it with the rest of the students. And then the students have to revise their board based on what was heard from the student leader. Now keep in mind, that's different than a whiteboard talk where every student shares. This is really creating that leader, that student that can stand up, share what's on their board, teach about what they wrote on their whiteboard for a little bit, and then the students learn from them and they have to revise based off of this. I prefer with student leaderboards to make them oversized. So each team will have an oversized board that will be given to the student leader. You really need to make sure that your student leaders are your medium high to high students in class. Student leaderboards is not a time to develop your medium low to low students and put them in a role of leadership, because they're really going to be on the spot with their learning if you use boards in this way. And so you really want to empower those students that are your high to medium high, that sort of get things faster than other students. It's their input, their own peer teaching, that's really going to help those teams when the peer teacher board is used as feedback. Student shoutouts is a tool I've talked about a few times. Once again, this is empowering some students. You pick a few students to stand up and walk around and do a feedback walk with you. There's really only one type of feedback walk I would give for student shoutouts, and that is as students are walking around, one or two students doing student shoutouts, they should look for positive things. So you only want peers shouting out positive, wonderful things that students have written on their boards. You don't want to give them a class trends feedback because you don't want them shouting out errors, right? You want those students to see really good stuff and shout it out. Now for this one, it's definitely okay to get your low, medium low students involved. You don't want to only do that, But the great thing about this is that those students are up and walking around, seeing great answers, and also feeling that sense of empowerment that, oh, I'm the teacher now. Mr. Mack does this all the time. He goes around and shouts things out. Now I get to do that too. They're sort of doing their own personal whiteboard walk and sharing great ideas with the class. You know, if you have a student that has a hard time sitting still, concentrating, you're still working on that relationship with them, get them doing some student shout out walks. Right? Get them up, have them shouting some stuff out. It'll really help them be on your side. And the great thing about it is it capitalizes on the Benjamin Franklin effect. Very important in education. You must know the Benjamin Franklin effect. We think that if we do favors for other people, they will like us more. In fact, that's not true. When we do favors for other people, they tend to wonder, why is this person doing a favor for me? Benjamin Franklin figured out that if you really want people to like you, you have to get them to do a favor for you. And that's actually how he would convert his enemies. He would get his enemies to do favors for him, and they would end up liking him. Because our brain is a really strange thing. When we're doing an action, our brain fills in the thoughts and the reasons for doing that action. And if a student that doesn't really like you is now standing up and walking around and shouting things out, they're doing you a favor. And that's how they view it. And so if that student's doing you a favor, they end up more on your side because like, well, why am I doing Mr. Mack a favor? I don't really like him too much, but maybe I do like him because I'm doing him a favor. So student shoutouts can be a great way to get students more on your side. All right, and this is the most important empowerment tool. It's also the hardest to establish in the classroom, and it's on-the-spot tutors. Literally, you need to turn students into efficient, wonderful tutors that can give heads-down help. So on-the-spot tutors is about students that are walking around the room looking for struggling students and giving heads-down help, getting down next to the students just like you do and helping them out. Now there's a process to creating on-the-spot tutors. You can't start it first thing in the year. What you really need to do is figure out who are my students that are most capable of helping others, right? And that really should be your high to medium high. All right, you need students that get things quickly, get things first, understand how they work first so they can really, really help others. And what I do is I'll have a student shadow me. So I'll be doing some heads down help and I'll say to, okay, Cynthia, I want you to come along with me. I'm going to train you to tutor. Okay, and then she'll come along and I'll do my heads down help where I just ask questions, point towards resources, give tips and hints, but I don't give them answers. And she's watching me do this. And then we'll talk a little bit, okay, what did you see? How did I do that? So over time, I can develop one on-the-spot tutor. And once you have one well-established, they can actually train other on-the-spot tutors. And so the goal for me was always to get at least 4 or 5 on-the-spot tutors in my classroom, where their students, I know they'll get it very quickly so that they can be up and also helping me walking around tutoring students that are struggling on their whiteboard response. And I'm telling you guys, it's really beautiful. When you've trained students to be great tutors, you can essentially replicate yourself as a teacher over and over and over again. There are students in your room that want to do this, that want to be empowered, that want to help others, and they're learning valuable leadership skills at the same exact time. And I know there's people that will debate me on that, right? Our job with our high students is to push them to the next level. You know what a lot of students that are high level lack? They lack the ability to lead. Right? They sit back and they listen. And that's kind of what gives them their strength, but also let's empower them. When I was in school, yeah, I was a high student, but I was very shy. I didn't see myself as a leader. I didn't see myself as important. And on-the-spot tutors creates importance in our students that need to feel that the most. When students are on-the-spot tutoring each other, then it helps them cognitively develop their capacity to think as well. But you really have to have a framework. You have to have a structure for on-the-spot tutors. So let me show you my tutoring framework for on-the-spot tutors. And this is something that takes a long time to develop in students. And this is something that was really developed over time. I used to say, okay, just ask questions, just Socratic, don't do anything else. But we found time and time again that another great way to tutor would be to point to a resource or say, hey, look here to find that. So pointing to a resource can also be a great thing. After taking Kagan Cooperative Learning trainings, they talk about coaching as the 4T. Tip, tip, teach, and try again. So I've also then added that. And you'll notice here I've got some potential questions they could ask, a way of helping with resources, some possible ways to start tips, and then the explanation of what teach and try again means. So this well established in a classroom, throughout the whole year I can develop my tutors over time. One of the really cool things about on-the-spot tutors is it opens up a tool that I didn't include in the toolbox. I thought maybe I'd include it, but it's more an application of everything rather than a tool itself. I used to call it whiteboard tutoring. You give students something to solve. So for example, a math problem. In ELA, it would be a question about a chunk of text. You have roles. One student is the tutor and the other one is the student. Now they are legitimately roles. So for example, the tutor I have on here, they randomly yell out, "You've got it," every couple of minutes. Do you see the element of fun I've added into that? You give the tutor a role, something fun, something zany. Like for example, you cannot use the word "the" when you're tutoring. Just simple little things to make it kind of interesting and fun. Then you have the student. Now this is extremely important. This helps your lower students feel really comfortable. You have to give them a role where they've forgotten something. And that's important because your low student might have already forgotten something or they can't do something. But if they're acting out the role, then they can feel comfortable that, oh, well, this is the role Mr. Mack has given me. It's not because I don't know how to do this, right? I mean, it puts them in a really, really cool place where they can build their confidence over time, but they're playing the role of not knowing. And so that gives the tutor a challenge and it gives the students sort of this fun thing to also act out at the same time. And the roles can be silly. For example, the tutor starts crying randomly in the middle of being tutored. Or it can be something like, "Can't hear every other sentence you say." It helps our students that struggle, right, kind of open up while they're being tutored because it's not them, it's the role Mr. Mack gave them. And it helps the tutors as well because they're more play acting a role. There's one tutor and one student. And then, they tutor, they help them out, but then they switch and do it again with exactly the same problem. I call it whiteboard tutoring because as a tutor, you must utilize the whiteboard. It's got to be used in your tutoring. And that also makes the tutoring visible so I can see what they're trying to help the student with. One really important rule is that I tell the tutors you are not allowed to write on the whiteboard, only the student is. And so that adds that element of challenge where they really have to try to get the student through their tutoring to be able to solve the question. And notice I'm working on my coaching framework now. Right? Students can only start by asking questions and pointing to resources and then giving tips and then asking for teach and try again. Okay, so the whole class is practicing the coaching framework. And the beautiful thing about that is I can walk around and I can see who's really good at this. And then they become my on-the-spot whiteboard tutors. So try this out in a classroom. It's a really cool way to get students cooperatively helping each other out while developing that on-the-spot tutoring skills. Okay, so that's the 3 tools, student leaderboards, student shoutouts, and on-the-spot tutors. So as usual, I want to apply this to a whiteboard cycle. In this case, we're going to look at math, and the element is a math problem. So which of these equations contains the ordered pair? It's got an F and a G and a 3 and a 5. Okay, so I have a standard math multiple choice problem. And then my interaction is I'm giving students a task. So they're going to mirror my board, and we're going to put A, B, C, D, and 4 blanks. And in the blanks, they put a plus if they think it's a good answer, a minus if they think it's a bad answer, and a question mark if they're not sure. And then notice we're adding the word because. We don't want to just whiteboard the single letters. Students need to fill out because for each answer. So it really forces them to think about them, and it's a great way to start. So they mirrored my board. I gave them that whiteboard stem and starter to help them out. Notice this is closed boarding. I want them only thinking for themselves. And then they go ahead and answer and respond. While they're doing that, I'm going to do a class trends feedback walk. I'm going to walk around and shout out some class trends. I'm also going to have a few students stand up and shout out. And so I'll pick, okay, Jose, Jordan, Cassie, come on over. I'll say, hey guys, here's what I want you to do. You're going to shout out what people have written for their first response. Not the rest of them, just the first response. Okay, so now they're going to walk around the room and they're going to share some first response things. One thing that's important to mention, I'm going to wait a little bit. I'm going to let them start their response so that it's on the board that they can shout out. So they don't have to stand and wait over someone as they finish their first response. So they're walking around, they're shouting out, A, plus because, or A minus because, or A question mark because. Okay, so they're shouting out what students have written down on their boards. Okay, so students have had time to respond. Now we're going to get back to that feedback revision. And how I'm going to start this is I'm going to start with the student leaderboard. Okay, so student number 1, which also happens to be my high student in the team, stands up with their student leaderboard. And they're going to do a beyond the board discussion. They're going to share what they wrote down. But I'm going to give students their revision first. And here's what I'm going to say to them. All right, guys. When they're done sharing, you're going to have to solve another problem similar to the one before. Okay, similar to the one before, but it's going to have new numbers and new letters. So you really got to listen very carefully. So the student leader shares their thoughts. You could have students revise their boards on the spot and change their answer, but I'd rather have them listening to what the student leader is saying, but that's sort of a teacher preference. Okay, so they're done. So now, erase your boards, everyone. Student leader erases their board, everyone erases their boards, and now they're going to revise. So now I'm giving them a brand new problem. It's the same exact skill, but it's my follow-up revision problem. And so they mirror the board again with that whiteboard sentence starter, A, B, C, D. And if you take a look at the problem, it's pretty much equivalent. It's got the same skills that students needed to learn about before. Now, my student leaders, I'm going to turn them into on-the-spot tutors. It's later in the year. They've mastered on-the-spot tutoring. I've made sure every one of my student leaders is a great tutor. I say, okay, student leaders, you're now on-the-spot tutors. And now as students answer their boards, the student leader goes around and does heads down help to help all of them. It's a beautiful, beautiful cycle, and notice how it empowers students. I've got 3 students shouting things out. I've got my student leaders sharing on their board with a beyond the board discussion with their team, and then I empower tons of student leaders to become on-the-spot tutors. And students feel fully supported using this. Finishing up, I just want to say that I love empowering students. It is my favorite thing to do. I have such a passion for getting students to do things they didn't think they were capable of doing. It can get to the point where instead of calling them by their first name, I would call some tutors by their last name, and they would be teachers in my book. Turning students into teachers is a beautiful, wonderful thing that can help your classroom. Okay, hope you got something from this. Feel free to respond and comment, and I'd love to argue about things. So if you're like, no, Jeff, I disagree with that completely, please respond or send me a personal message. I grow through discussion, through debate. And I think that's a really important thing in education. I don't feel like we challenge each other enough. So please, if you've watched this video this far, challenge me. Let's talk about it, let's discuss. I'd love to learn some more from you. All right, everyone, have an excellent week back at school, and I will talk to you soon.
Of the world.